another random question. Is the Olympic Village really a raging Olympian orgy?
Not to the extent that people might expect, but also not entirely no either. Like definitely also yes, but they've taken some of the fun out of that now, from what I understand, in that they were kicking athletes out of the village within 48 hours of them competing at Paris. For us, I think we finished on Thursday of week 1. So we had like 10 days.
Dang.
Yeah, but by the end, you're like hanging in. Get me the fuck out of here. Seriously, the Olympic Village, the closing ceremonies, I remember being in there with a teammate of mine. We're in the middle of the stadium, in the middle of the field, right in the center of the thing. The Spice Girls, spice up the world. And we're like, let's get out of here. We left to try and get to Macca's because it's just a bit much.
Okay, we have some clarity on that answer.
So I would say it's a definitely for some people that, getting pretty loose.
Well, hello, it's Pete Maiden here with Convicts with my friend Sam Loch.
Hey, mate.
How you going?
Good to be here in person.
Thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Listeners may not know that Pete rode at Cal Berkeley. We raced against each other. I rode at Princeton.
Do you know what our count was? I know you beat me freshman year twice.
Yeah.
And then I think sophomore year, I know we beat you in the duel.
Yeah.
But I don't know how many other times.
I don't know.
I'm going to go back through the records.
Yeah, you might want to put an addendum. Just tack it on the end of this podcast. And by the way, you'll hear from Pete again if he won more races. If you didn't, you won't hear any more about it.
There won't be any notes on that. I want to jump straight into the Olympics, which is currently on. I noticed you had a few things to say a couple of days ago about the conditions for the athletes in preparation, but as an Olympian, dual Olympian, how do you feel about the Olympics?
Well, it's a conversation, sort of hard to capture succinctly. There's the spectacle of it, which is what most people pay attention to. My mum in particular is like a freak for the opening and closing ceremonies, which I'm not interested in at all. Not really the uniforms or anything to do with anything other than the performances. And that's largely because I know what the experience is like for the athletes and how much time they've likely committed to the preparation and then the execution, and for that to be messed with it all for the sake of politics or for the sake of grandstanding or the IOC or anything that's not performance feels like a compromise and a personal bugaboo.
For me, the Olympics is kind of that, is like, all of this should be taken into account. The spectators, the sledging, whatever it is, just like the absolute best athlete ends up winning. Is that still the case for the Olympics?
No.
Yeah.
No. And I don't think it was ever the case. I think it's often the case because for all the reasons that you hope or think that it might be, that part of it is still true. But example, overnight, Jakob Ingebrigtsen, who is the fastest 1500 meter runner in the world, came fourth after leading the race for 1450 meters. That's a champion not winning, and that's the way it goes. That maybe have been in any number of things, we don't know. That's with an individual athlete, even when things go as planned, but you don't ever really know what are the factors that impacted that performance. So say you've got two athletes of equal ability, but then they've got unequal preparations. No matter how champion they are, that's going to affect results. Then that's only individual athletes. So team athletes are far more at the mercy of all these variables, which they can't account for. It's the same reason that there's a difference in post-traumatic stress disorder between special operators and grunts, Marines, Army, infantry, those sort of guys. When they go to war, because they're just cogs in the machine, they don't really get any discretion over their missions. They just get sent in, whether they die or they see someone die or things go well or they don't. that's really got nothing to do with them, whereas special operators get to calculate their mission execution. And even when things go tits up, where they can then live with the consequences. And if you think of a team athlete, and this is the difference between a single sculler and a men's 8 in rowing, if you're in the 8, you have a say, but at a certain point, in order for mission alignment, everyone needs to kind of fall in, because even if you notice something that's not right, if you're constantly pointing it out, it takes the confidence out of the mission. And so everyone's in a real tricky position where they're individually at the mercy of how things are going, and they kind of have to just ride the ship for better or worse. And when that goes well, that's making the most of its parts. And when it's not, usually under a big stressful moment, that's when things tend to fray apart.
Unfortunately for the athletes and the people involved, like, their mental health isn't in their control completely, because they're setting what success is. And if success is the win, and they're basing, you know, potentially happiness or long-term, you know, like feeling rewarded and satisfied for the effort on that, and it's to some degree in a whole lot of variables.
That's what makes it worse.
That's what makes it worse.
That's why that's probably why this conversation exists, because it's either it goes the way you want, and that's good for those athletes, or it doesn't, and everyone can accept that the way that it went is the only way it could have gone, because it's just a matter of ability.
Yeah.
But then the fact that it's not that is why you have people having a hard time with it. It's taken me a long time to be at peace, or at least in the direction of it. For example, I didn't get the Olympic rings tattooed for 12 years after I first became an Olympian. So maybe it would have been about 2020, and I was an Olympian in 2008. So it took me over a decade to be even prepared, because you know you have those rings, then people ask you the question, and then you need to be okay with that conversation taking place, because it's like, oh, you went to the Olympics. Yep. How'd you go? Or how'd you go? Or did you get a medal? Or perhaps even obscenely, and I've seen this question asked of someone that's not me as well, and this is routine for anyone that's gone, is, did you win an Olympic gold medal? And then you have to be like, nope. And then you have that conversation 1,000 times. Yeah.
Your self-esteem coming out of a win is, you know, electrified, and it all makes it worthwhile. But that's also not life. Like, losing more often in life is the case. Even in business, I feel like the circumstances affect it. Luck plays a huge role. As much as I'd love to say strategy has got us to where we are, it's probably 50-50. Like, jobs land on your plate right at the right time. Pandemic happens, you know, like, you can't control the circumstances of the business you're in. The same way with athletes, but I almost feel like the losses, learning to deal with the losses, probably is better for your mental health than just winning.
Over the long enough time. Over a long enough
time, because that's reality.
If you can. Yeah.
And I wonder too, I feel like I hear just as many stories about great athletes that were the champions of champions actually having more issues with mental health long term, or as many issues as I'm sure people that have dealt with losses have had, because maybe in the end you get to the end of this long winning streak, and there's still a come down regardless of the loss, you know.
Yeah, well, elite sport is not life, and no matter how long you extend your career, there's the whole rest of it, which is just as consequential. Like, the things I'm doing now don't mean any less to me than the Olympics. They just might mean less to other people, and winning gold medals at the Olympics doesn't guarantee you anything else.
Tell me about how you ended up where you are here, what you did. Obviously rowing, the Olympics, the Australian team, and then what you did in the US with Adidas, and that kind of like what your career trajectory's been to get you to what you're doing now.
As you know, we rowed at school, and that was a sport that was accessible, but also something you could really sink your teeth into, and a sport that rewards effort. And we put a ton of effort into it, and things went well, and that provided us with opportunities. You and I in particular, one opportunity was to go and row at college in the US. When I was over there, the US national team was training out of the Princeton boathouse, and there were guys on my team at Princeton that were on the US team. So I knew where I was in terms of what standard I was at, and I would train with the guys in the Australian team when I came back for holidays and vacation, that sort of thing. So I knew I was at that level, but when I graduated, it was as though I'd been on the moon for 4 years. So the Australian team had no real understanding or interest in integrating. So I had to basically shout and force my way into the training center at the end of 2006, which is the year I graduated college, and then made the national team in 2007 and was on the team every year until 2012. And realistically, I would have kept going. My fear was that I was not in a great financial position.
Well, there's no money in rowing.
It did improve over time, and it improves if you win medals, and I won a few more of those than at the tail end than at the start. But at the start, it was $400 a week. That was like go and survive. I remember a friend of ours, a former teammate of both of us, but a former teammate of mine on the national team, Matt Ryan, and us scrounging for change underneath our car seats to have $6 to go get dinner at the AIS, and that was normal. Yeah. So the longer you go, the more you tread in water. And when you go to Princeton, you've got some of your former teammates and classmates that are sort of launching into their careers in these positions of affluence. And I didn't especially want that, but you don't want to be destitute either. Yeah. And so I think even in 2004, which is 4 years out from Beijing, I remember having a conversation with my parents, because it was 2 years prior to graduation, to be like, hey, just so you know, I'm not going to be like getting a suit and going, I'm training for Beijing. And so in my mind, I was already going and just had to take the steps. I was thinking about what sports I could do that I could go to the Olympics. Mm. And I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe the sport that you're doing, you're handy at, so just keep doing that. But the thing that I liked about it was the competition and the training and the ability to move all your chips, like just to make a big bet, and that's the fun part for me. Rowing was just the vehicle with which to do those things. So I eventually got to a point where I was looking for opportunities in my wheelhouse, which is sport and health and performance. There wasn't necessarily rowing, and this opportunity to work for Adidas and move back to America, which I was also keen to do, because there's a lot about that, the opportunities, the mindset of there. They sort of expect that people should strive for success, whereas we have this tall poppy thing.
Yeah, we should talk about it.
There's a lot that's great about both countries, but at that point, I just married my wife. This job came up. It made sense to go over and do that and check that out for a period of time.
After all of this experience you've got, and after exposure to great coaches and athletes, what are some of the key things you now coach people on?
Well, there's most of the stuff I coach people is just tools that I've found that work for me. It's stress tested. Anything that I'm pushing out there, whether that's training or nutrition or how to think, which is just the stuff that you can influence. I don't think mental health is this ethereal, untenable. I think it's something that you can actually improve, and knowing that you can improve it is just a better place to come from it than feeling like you're at the mercy of it. So realizing that there are strategies, and until you've explored and implemented all of them, then it's never really completely fucked. There's always stuff you can do. A lot of my framework at the moment comes from Stoicism, which is interestingly the underpinning of cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's not just, I think people think being Stoic, which is kind of how we imagine it, is non-emotional, but it's more of a philosophy and an actionable one at that. So a key tenet is something that you and I learn, which is controlling the controllables, which in Stoicism would be the dichotomy of control, which is just that there are things we can control and there are things that we can't. And the effort is to let go of all the things you can't control, because you can't control it. All you can control is the stuff you can control, and which is a long enough list. But if you have that clarity, then you are aware that it's not all of the things you need to worry about, just some things. It's a constant effort to reaffirm within the context of your life, what are the things I can control here? You can't control traffic, but you can control leaving for your destination a little bit earlier so that traffic has less of an influence. Just like you can't control the weather, you can control whether you pack a raincoat or not. I think another thing that is really useful to know is that you are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are a product of your subconscious, but they're not you, and nor do they necessarily have any relevance on you. So if you have a thought that's anxious or comes from a place of self-doubt, then you can notice it, but it doesn't necessarily mean anything. If you adopt a position of, I can exert some influence over my life and my surroundings rather than this is a thing that's happening to me, then you're going to be in a better position. Along those lines, no one can make you feel anything. It's a pet bugaboo of mine when I hear people say, so-and-so did something that made me feel whatever way. It's like, you allowed yourself to feel that way. What influence could someone possibly have on how you feel without you allowing them to do that to you? And so I guess I tend to practice and preach a lot of autonomy and both self-control, but also self-empowerment, so that you or any person is in a position to action change within their life. So one way to think about it would be, we just had a chat offline about you trying to improve your health, and everyone has stuff that pops up, and you could very quickly get into a mindset of this terrible thing that has happened to me and things are bad because this thing has happened to me, as opposed to not having to entertain any of that. Just to stay in the place of figuring out what you can do or what needs doing, and then doing that. You need to be real clear with yourself over what's my responsibility here and what's not. And even within a family, you've got a husband and a wife, or a husband and husband, or a wife and wife, or whatever sort of arrangement. And there's usually different roles, and those roles might evolve over time. But if you're doing the role of your partner and not doing yours, or it starts to get confused, then no one's really going to feel both competent and satisfied, or that there's clarity, as opposed to, hey, we're all pushing in the same direction. I'm doing what I need to do and you're doing what you need to do. And then the same thing applies in team sports. But in team sports, sometimes the people on your team you might do great and they can't or don't for whatever reason. And then that's no matter how much of a champion you are.
What sport were you worst at?
It's a long list. It's like any sport most sport that I'm good at is only because I've put in a lot of work.
Yeah.
So I wasn't good at rowing to begin with, or really I can't remember any sport. I'm naturally talented at this. It's like far more likely that I'd be shit. But if I can see some progress, some way that I could make progress, or that it suits my skill set, which when you're a kid, you don't know you have any skill set, and you don't know that training can make quite a bit of a difference. It's just who's got talents and who doesn't. So I mean, I don't have great hand-eye coordination, so cricket, just terrible. There's like nothing there for me to be good at. I think I'd like handy on a bike, but never really got access to competitive cycling. So that's why I sort of wonder about the jobs we end up in, or the sports that we play. Sometimes it's just because of circumstances that occurred a decade before, rather than a real active volition.
You said something about momentum before, which is like, and I do think when you were just talking about stoicism, your control the controllables, those things, that feels very like you have to take the time to be conscious. and almost write it down what you can control. Because like if you're just living with the momentum of life, and like maybe this is a luxury too, to have the time and the privilege to be able to even talk about this stuff, think about it. But that's our reality. I was talking to our team recently, like about our Convicts team, about something a coach once said to me. It was actually my Berkeley coach. And he was like, look, I can set the program and give you the schedule, and you'll perform well. But the day you take your training into your own hands is the day you win.
Mm.
And I think I was like, I kind of knew what he was talking about, but I just wanted to do the minimum amount. Mm-hmm. And I said the same thing to our team. I'm like, guys, like, this is not a job where you show up and do your job. Or I don't want it to feel like that. Like, this is a place to get done what you want to get done. And yeah, we've got to do our roles, and everyone knows we've got client work to do. But like the day that we have the initiative for everyone to take it into their own hands and get done what they actually want to get done in their career under this umbrella is the day that this whole thing will be super successful.
You have to be in a position to ask themselves, what do I want? Which I'm not sure if most people do. And even if they say this is what I want, then you probably be useful to ask yourself, well, what are the limitations that I have to being that thing or achieving that thing? And then you have to live with those deficiencies, and then you actually have to do something about it, which is probably going to require change, because if it didn't, then you would already be on that path. Mm-hmm. And change is hard. But a person to be able to do that by themselves is both a privilege and a luxury, and not available for, and maybe not a natural skill. I probably have that more naturally than most, and have created space to be able to do that. Even with rowing, I didn't just decide I'm a rower, so I'll just keep rowing till the wheels fall off. I would, every season at least, contemplate the idea of not rowing, so that the next season wasn't a foregone conclusion. I would recommit every year, and therefore you're not just, well, I'm here because I'm here, but I'm here because I want to be here.
You talked about tall poppy before, which I want to come back to, but I've experienced it too. I think like I've loved being in the US, for close to 20 years, and feeling that positivity of like, I've got an idea, people want to get around you and support that, and knowing how to support success well. And I was talking to someone about this once, and they actually, they were like, yeah, but what's great about tall poppy is like, it's humility. And I hadn't heard that angle on it. It's like, yeah, but we have humility, and that's really important. And there's probably some elements of truth on both sides of it. But in my experience, like, we could do with a whole lot more of that positive, like, let's do this. Let's not cut down the success stories. What's your, now being back in Australia for a little while,
perception of it? The thing, the American aspect has always made more sense to me intuitively, because before you're even aware of cultural differences, you're just who you are based on, genetics and environment. And by the time, end of school, when you need to make some decisions about your life, the instinct to go do cool shit and get after it and just distinguish yourself, that felt very normal to me. And therefore going to college in America felt like a natural extension of that. And then you're starting to observe that over there, the expectation to elevate yourself is supported and encouraged and really normal. No matter where you're from or what you're doing, it's like, yeah, you're getting after it. Awesome. Because people think that maybe I too can get after it within my own world. Whereas here, where it's not, it's either threatening, it's the same place that, in Australia, you could have a bunch of mates, and some guy goes and gets a new shirt. It's like a pink and turquoise shirt, and he rolls in and everyone's like, hey, cool fucking shirt, man. Like, what are you, like, it can be very easily, like, any point of distinction is just a problem, and they're like, let's bring you down to the rest of us. Whereas in the States, there's a bit more like, hey, that's a cool shirt, like, good on you for, flying your flag. And so that bleeds into the American entrepreneurial spirit, but also their sporting success. And if you're an ass kicker, which I am, then you want to be around ass kickers. And when ass kicking is like more normal than not. So there's a lot that I love about Australia. There's a reason that we both live here now. But I think that's a lot to do with kids. And you think of where do you want to raise your kids? And maybe on average, you would want them to grow up with humility too. So maybe it's just as an individual, I connect more with the US spirit, but love a lot of elements of Australia and what we think is normal. And some of the issues I have with the US that exist too. It's just not when it comes to personal aspiration.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, thanks so much for chatting. It was
Pleasure, always. Happy to be here. Keep doing it.
It's good fun, yeah.